In 2017, researchers at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio published a study that quietly contradicted one of the most persistent assumptions in Western infant care. They were studying preterm infants, babies born early, whose nervous systems were more visibly unfinished than those of full-term newborns, which made them useful for observing developmental processes that happen more slowly and clearly than in typical development. What the researchers were measuring was the brain's response to physical touch. Specifically, they wanted to know whether and how the quality and consistency of early tactile experience shaped neural development. The findings were not subtle. Infants who received more consistent, attentive physical contact in their earliest weeks showed measurably faster development of the neural pathways associated with stress, regulation, sensory integration, and emotional self-control. Not marginally faster, measurably faster in ways that remained detectable months after the neonatal period ended. The brain was being shaped, literally and structurally, by being held. This is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic way of describing the warmth of parental love. It is structural neurology, documented by measurement with outcomes that persist. And it explains, at least in significant part, why Japanese infant care has looked the way it has looked for hundreds of years. Not because Japanese culture theorized the neuroscience is recent, but because the practice, transmitted through generations of cultural knowledge, happened to be doing exactly what the developing brain requires most. Japanese mothers carry their babies not occasionally, not for comfort during difficult moments, consistently, as a default for much of the waking hours across the first year of life. The traditional method is called onbu, a style of carrying in which the baby is held against the caregiver's back, secured in a wide cloth wrap or structured carrier, positioned high and close to the body. The baby faces outward or toward the caregiver's back, depending on age and context. The mother continues her daily activities, walking, working, cooking, shopping, with the infant integrated into her physical world, rather than placed in a separate piece of equipment beside it. Before onbu, and sometimes alternating with it, younger infants are carried in the front in a similar wrap position, the baby's cheek against the mother's chest, its ear over her heartbeat. The positioning is not accidental. The heartbeat, at a rhythm the baby has known since before birth, is among the most powerful regulatory cues the newborn nervous system has access to. In most Western contexts, the stroller has become the default mode of infant transport for most of the day. The carrier is often reserved for fussy moments or particular situations. The baby spends significant portions of the day in a bouncer, a swing, a playmat, a car seat. These are horizontal or semi-horizontal surfaces, stationary or mechanically rocking, separated from the caregiver's body by varying distances. The difference between these two worlds, the carried baby and the equipment-dependent baby, is not merely a difference of comfort or closeness. It is a difference of neurological environment. The first mechanism involves cortisol. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone, and in the developing infant, it plays a larger organizational role than it does in adults. Not just in response to stress, but in the calibration of the stress response system itself. The level at which cortisol typically operates in the first months of life becomes, over time, a kind of set point, a baseline around which the whole autonomic nervous system organizes. Physical touch, particularly the kind involving consistent pressure and warmth, the kind produced by being held close against another body, suppresses cortisol production in infants. Multiple studies, using salivary cortisol as the measure, have found that carried babies show lower cortisol levels than babies who spend more time in equipment, not lower when they're crying and being soothed, lower as a resting baseline. A nervous system calibrated at a lower cortisol baseline is, in practical terms, a nervous system that is easier to regulate, slower to activate, faster to return to calm. It is a nervous system that has learned, at the most fundamental level, that the world is not threatening, that proximity is available, that distress will be resolved before it escalates. The downstream effects of this calibration persist well past infancy. Studies tracking children whose early months involved high levels of physical contact have found lower rates of anxiety disorders at FIR5 and Kurzman, better emotional regulation in social settings, and stronger performance on measures of executive function. The nervous system you wire in the first year casts a long shadow. The second mechanism involves the vestibular system. The vestibular system lives in the inner ear and is responsible for balance, spatial orientation, and a significant part of how the brain processes and integrates sensory information from multiple channels simultaneously. It is one of the earliest sensory systems to develop. It is functional before birth, and its development continues and accelerates in the first 2 years of life. What the vestibular system needs to develop well is input, movement, variation in position, changes in acceleration, the micro-adjustments of a moving body. A baby carried by a walking adult receives continuous vestibular input, not the repetitive single-axis motion of a mechanical swing, but the complex, variable, three-dimensional movement of a human being walking, turning, bending, adjusting. The inner ear is being exercised, challenged, and developed by this input in a way that a stationary seat cannot provide. Researchers at the University of Michigan studying early vestibular development found a significant correlation between the amount of carrying in infancy and measures of sensory integration in toddlers. Children who more effectively in carrying had the sex away, naturally engorging in roughs, and triggering salient processing difficulties and earlier development of the spatial awareness skills that support balance, coordination, and eventually literacy in mathematics. The mechanical swing and the bouncer are designed to soothe. They do that reasonably well, but soothing through repetitive mechanical motion is a different neurological experience than being integrated into a moving human body, and the developmental outputs differ in ways that become visible over years. The third mechanism is one that receives almost no attention in Western parenting conversations, despite strong evidence behind it: respiratory and cardiac co-regulation. When a baby is held in close physical contact with a caregiver, particularly when the baby's face is near the caregiver's chest, something measurable happens to the baby's breathing patterns. They begin to synchronize, at least partially, with the caregivers. This is not a coincidence or a byproduct of position. It is an active biological process. The developing autonomic nervous system in an infant is highly sensitive to the physiological state of the primary caregiver. Heart rate, breathing rate, temperature, muscle tone. The baby's nervous system is monitoring and, in a meaningful sense, in training to these inputs. When a baby is carried against a calm, breathing body, the baby's own autonomic system tends to downregulate toward that calmer state. When a baby is in a separate piece of equipment, this co-regulation signal is absent. This is the mechanistic underpinning of what attachment researchers call co-regulation, the process by which an infant's nervous system learns to self-regulate, partly through repeated experience of regulation via proximity. It's not that the baby becomes dependent on the caregiver to regulate. It's that the experience of co-regulation builds the neural infrastructure that allows self-regulation to develop. The carried baby is not learning helplessness. It is having its regulatory systems built through repeated practice of what regulation feels like. In 1986, a study was published in the journal Pediatrics that has been cited in infant developmental literature ever since. Researchers randomly assigned new parents to one of two EXALUs: normal care or an increase in carrying by approximately 3 hours per day. The increase was the only variable changed. 6 weeks later, the high-carrying group showed a 43% reduction in total daily crying and a 50% reduction in evening colic behavior. 43%. From carrying to... This result has been replicated in different forms in different countries in subsequent decades. The mechanism, now better understood, is the cortisol regulation and nervous system co-regulation described above. The practical implication is immediate. Japanese mothers were not following a study. They were following a cultural inheritance that happened to encode exactly what the biology needed. The outcome: babies who cry less, sleep more predictably, regulate more easily, and show better developmental trajectories is the predictable result of giving the developing nervous system what it profits, in every biological sense, designed to receive. You do not need an onbu wrap. You do not need any specific product. What you need is to increase the proportion of time your infant spends in contact with a moving, warm, breathing body, yours or another primary caregiver's, relative to the time they spend in a stationary piece of equipment. Even a modest increase, 30 to 60 minutes per day, added consistently, produces measurable change in cortisol baseline within a few weeks. Carried during the late afternoon, when cortisol peaks and colic is most common. Carried during morning waking, when the nervous system is freshest and the co-regulation signal sets the tone for the day. Carried whenever closeness is available and logistically possible. The baby's brain will do the rest. It knows what to do with being held. It has always known.